G'day, guys. I keep on getting comments, emails by people, concerned about stuff in vaccines, um, along those sort of lines, and things like certain types of metals and, graphene and all sorts of things and questions. I think I've covered this in the past, both in live streams and on different videos, but it just seems like these comments keep on coming back and back and back again. And as I've pointed out, the body can excrete all this stuff. And in the environment, there is far more in the environment than what you would get in a vaccine if there was something like that in. Now, the current ones on paper, they're showing their ingredients don't have graphene. The Fluvax does, but as I've pointed out, there's more graphene in cooked food than basically, or carbon particles of graphene type structures than basically what's in even the Fluvax. So, I just don't get the issue. The liver and the kidneys are more than capable of excreting any amount of this sort of stuff. The small amounts, the minuscule amounts that exist in these things are a non-issue. I will not give any comfort to such pseudo nonsense, which especially comes from the vagoonerized community, especially the naturopathic community, because that's where all this comes from. Some of you guys have been exposed, or ex-vegans or ex-vegetarians, have been exposed to this over a number of decades, and you believe that it's true, but it's garbage. It's absolute and utter garbage. Always has been. There's a difference between being in an industrial accident where you get exposed to massive amounts of aluminium or massive amounts of manganese or massive amounts of whatever, these sort of things. Yes, that can be a damn problem, when you get exposed to from an industrial accident or in an environment to massive amounts. The minuscule amounts that you may get exposed to in just general living is so minuscule and so minor, the body has an ability through its detoxification pathways to eliminate. It's a non-issue. We need to stop this pseudo nonsense because it just blows away our credibility. We need to base our arguments on known factors. We know quite clear that, mRNA, viral vector ones, all these ones have been used in oncology as immunotherapies. They've had a lot of side effects. In some people, more severe, in some less severe, but they have a lot of problems associated with them. I know Alex or someone else mentioned, it may have been Dom, that mentioned that the future flu vax are talking about using the mRNA type technology. If that's the case, I won't do it anymore. I'll stop taking the flu vax completely. I will not use this technology. It's too problematic. Traditional vaccine methods are fine. It's a localized effect with an adjunct, but even the adjunct can be an issue in some cases. Now, what could be the case of an adjunct being an issue? It's not the adjunct. It's the type. So if you use an adjunct, something to sensitize the immune system, which may be in foods or maybe in supplements or whatever, that's the wrong way to manufacture something. You should use something which is not edible. That means something that humans would not consume. And so, like a bark extract, like they've used in the Novavax, people are not going to use that specific bark extract, or some other component that is an inorganic substance which people are not going to consume, or whatever. Something like that, which is a foreign thing to sensitize the immune system to rush into that localized area with a traditional vaccination. Not a problem with that. I do have a problem when they use things that potentially Like in Australia, they use the HIV for their COVID type as a viral vector. And then they realized, that's going to cause problems if people down the track want to basically find out what their status is. They may be getting a false positive when they don't really have HIV. So that was just an idiotic thing. They realized that, this is the problem, that some virologists are not using their fucking head. They're more caught up in, let's get this fantastic thing out, rather than thinking about the composition of what they do. And that's where I always research vaccines, how they're put together, the components and all that. And then I consider whether they have problems, issues with them or not. So on paper, then I say, well, this looks like a traditional without any real problems that they're going to create any sort of reactivity, which is of a negative sort that could have consequences down the track where you're sensitized to certain compounds, which you shouldn't be because you may be consuming those or whatever. That's a valid argument, a logical, valid argument to make. It's illogical to basically say just because there may be minute amounts of graphene or minute amounts of aluminium or minute amount of mercury or whatever, that this is a damn big problem. Your body can deal with massive amounts in comparison. These are microscopic amounts which are completely and utterly irrelevant. They usually put them in as a stabilizer, so something doesn't degrade. They could use other things as well, but sometimes it's cheaper. But it's not something that is going to cause toxicity to the body. The body can eliminate it. It can't replicate because it's it's a metal, so it's not going to replicate in you. It's got no way. Inorganic matter does not replicate. So it's a non-issue in that regard. Let me just share my screen for a moment just to make this point quite freaking clear. This is the Department of Environmental Conservation in the New York State. And as you can see, they've got issues. They've been dealing with issues of clean air, managing mercury in the air. So, and this all comes from emissions, heavy metal emissions that actually are happening because of industrial activity in the state. So if you live close to an industrial site, you get exposed to massive amounts in comparison. We're talking about 100-fold difference, and you're concerned about, you're living in New York State, and you're more concerned about the minuscule amount may be in a vaccine compared to what you're being exposed to. Get real. Things like in rivers, people still eat fish out of this. There's toxic aluminium. It's declining, but still, and this is how it actually you get rid of it. The biliary excretion, basically things like organically based organic acids, all these are basically, things like arsenic, lead, mercury are basically eliminated. Effects of aluminium, your biliary, basically excess iron, excess aluminium. I've talked about manganese as well. These things, they've actually done it on rats to see how much they can actually cope. So poor rats have been overdosed to see how much can they take and how much can they detox or eliminate through, the gallbladder, the biliary system, biliary excretion. I mean, there's plenty of research. Here they talk about, issues with liver disease. And I'll come to that shortly, So sort of both urinary, so basically through the kidneys or through the excretion of different compounds. So generally speaking, our bodies have got capacity to detox. You've got the lungs, you've got basically the kidneys, and you've got the liver. If they're working, you've got no problems unless you get massive amounts, and then you can't eliminate those. As I said, the liver can eliminate 90% of manganese. So even if you get exposed quite a bit, You have to really get exposed to industrial level manganese before you can actually really have severe issues. I know I hear naturopaths all the time, but I usually say, well, I suspect that person's been on a veganurized diet, has a dysfunctional liver, has a dysfunctional gallbladder, and possibly has atrophied kidneys because doesn't eat enough, protein, animal protein, and so has some problems excreting some of this stuff and is accumulating some heavy metals and stuff like that. Well, revelation, get on a species appropriate diet and you won't have those problems. And basically giving people a whole lot of so-called detox crap that naturopaths fill people and make shitloads of money off. All they need to do is basically get them on a species appropriate diet, give them taurine to emulsify those bloody gallstones so they can actually move and emulsify, become smaller and clear out. So basically their bile can actually eliminate, excrete a lot of these heavy metals and stuff like that, and the xenotoxins or whatever. That's how it's supposed to work. We've always been exposed to different environmental toxins for a long time. And I can tell you, if you go back to, the early industrial revolution and periods earlier, people weren't dying from cardiovascular disease. They weren't dying from Alzheimer's. They weren't dying from any of this sort of stuff. And they were still being exposed to certain levels much higher than people now living in their hermetically sealed homes and working in clean offices. And they were a hell of a lot healthier. Look at my father, 87, Boilermaker welder, exposed to all sorts of fucking chemicals through his life when he was working as a Boilermaker welder. And he's a hell of a lot healthier, takes no drugs compared to all these other cockwombles out there that were, guzzling down the sugars and guzzling down, all this other crap. And then worried about the small, minuscule amounts that's in vaccines in terms of heavy metals or, some other bloody thing. Get over it, when it comes to serious stuff, if you want to have credibility with me, you can go on your pseudoscience, run around. But if you want credibility with me, I want research to back up any argument that people make or email me or whatever. Because the reality is there is no credibility to these things. The minuscule amounts that are in these sort of things are extremely minuscule. Now, there's a different question. Do you need or don't you need certain things? That's a different question. I've got less issue with regular vaccines, whether it's any one of the major diseases that are around, whether mumps, measles or whatever, or any of the other sort of stuff. Yep, I'm pretty easy with all that sort of stuff. Do we need the flu jab every year? Probably not. Periodically, I don't mind doing it. Why? Because it sort of updates my template, because I'm not being exposed to it. So the last time I had the flu may have been a decade or two ago. And so if I get it again, at least I'm more up to date. Now, people will out there say, well, if you take these vaccines, you'll allow vaccines to mutate and all that. Bullshit. That's another bullshit. That's another, naturopathic, somebody playing with their tool, because he's completely naturopathic retarded statements. First of all, the majority of all new strains and all these things usually happen in populations that are not vaccinated in a lot of third world countries, where they are basically interacting and have multiple viruses amongst themselves and things and are interacting in complex ways and sharing a lot of genetics. That's where a lot of these things are happening. They're not happening in first world countries. Very rarely do we see those happening. So that's another piece of bullshit whatsoever that vaccines cause. At the end of the day, when you get exposed to something, whether you're vaccinated or not, you will still get the infection. How long it stays in your body means how long it can potentially mutate, whether you're vaccinated or not. Now, what is going to keep it in your body for longer without being eliminated out of your body? And then also make you also a higher spreader, super spreader? Well, your diet and your vitamin D status. That is why we don't see, if we go to tribal societies amongst them, we don't see epidemics. We don't see. It's only with civilization did we see this sort of stuff. When we got onto the kibble, the species inappropriate diet, when we didn't maintain good vitamin D status or get enough fat soluble vitamins or cholesterol to basically maintain good vitamin D status. It's these things moving away from what I call species adapted lifestyle, which is basically sun, salt, and basically meat. These are the things that we've changed, altered. I mean, if we take a look, who are the people that are super spreaders? It's the morbidly obese, those with comorbidities, those who are sick. That means who have got weak immune systems. So their weak immune systems allows for greater mutation. Whether they're vaccinated or not, it's irrelevant. It's really people's health status. And the other reason why you have primarily in a lot of third world countries is because they're impoverished. They don't have any vaccines. So they basically allow these things can spread rapidly through the population, all sorts of viruses. Plus they've got weaker immune systems because they really live very difficult lives. You know, so they and we know this. We know if you go back in history and look at medieval times and in early industrial revolution, when people were in absolute squalor, like they're in the third world countries in all these shanty towns. That's how London was and all these sort of things. People in many cases left rural areas and go to these city areas and live less years and die because they were exposed to so much and a poor diet. Because at least in the village, they could get access to some animal foods. In these cities, they were basically working for next to nothing, pennies like slaves, because they'd been pushed off the land by most of the gentry, and were basically living in abject poverty with very little nutrition. Rickets and all these sort of diseases were endemic, you know. So, and if you became a sailor, you're more likely to die from scurvy because you were eating basically dried kibble, while the officers never got scurvy because they were eating meat. These are the realities why the very low survival in those years. So when you move away from a species appropriate diet and all that, you have weaker immunity. You're more vulnerable to both not only seeing within you potential for mutation, but also for death. And that's fundamentally the difference. And we need to move away from this pseudo nonsense that naturopaths have been pushing and peddling, like the MTHFR issue that I've blown away for good, hopefully. It's a riboflavin deficiency. That's all, which basically meat and dairy have shitloads of riboflavin. All I have to do is eat a species appropriate diet. My MTHFR goes away and I don't have to pay and fork out shitloads of money like most vagoons do to all these naturopaths. So simple. God, these damn tribal people knew so much. This is what aggravates me. I like to basically argue against real issues, not false issues. False issues basically undermines our argument against these new dangerous mRNA and viral vector type vaccines and this technology that's been fast-tracked because it's very profitable for pharmaceutical companies. They don't give a shit about the consequences. That's what concerns me. And when people are throwing a lot of pseudo crap in there into the mix, all they do is basically people will turn around and say, that's nonsense, because they can find arguments like I just did there. I just showed you quite clearly that you're exposed to far more of these heavy metals and everything, and your own body can get rid of these things. Any person with half a brain cell, with basically somebody who's got a bit of education in biochemistry or biophysics or physiology, that knows how the body works and how the body can detox and all that. And for those small minuscule amounts, we'll say, you're an idiot. They won't even talk to you. You're wasting their time because basically you've got nothing to offer. You're basically, people will lose you lose credibility. It's simple as that, guys. You lose credibility. Don't use those stupid arguments. I know they come from the naturopathic lunatics, the vagunarized naturopaths, because that's where they come from. That's their origins. You've got to go back and find out where the origins of these things are. It's the vagunarized, the ones that are eating the kibble and have got problematic livers, problematic gallbladders, problematic kidneys, problematic lungs, because lung surfactant requires choline, which is in animal foods, and palmitate, which is a saturated fat. If you're not getting enough of these things, you're going to have health problems. You're going to have an inability to clear these things out of your body. They can bioaccumulate then they can become an issue. And all they do is then give you some fucking naturopathic piece of bullshit detox protocol that doesn't resolve the problem. It may eliminate a bit or whatever, or bind a bit. Some of the ones are smarter that know you can use selenium as selenite to basically chelate and a few things. But sometimes they use too much and they don't balance it out. They don't balance it with iodine sufficiently due to ignorance. Now they do because they know about it, but it doesn't cover everything. It gets rid of mercury, but it doesn't cover all the other sort of stuff because it's a weak chelator, which I've discussed before. The problem is, we need to be eating a species appropriate diet if we want to eliminate these things and stop worrying about the minuscule amounts that everybody makes a fuss about. The real issues are some of the other big ones. We need to stop and we need to argue the right sort of stuff and not be distracted by all these non-issues because they undermine our credibility. See, an MD or a physiologist or whatever looking at my material can't really argue with me because I can evidence everything. And that's the difference. And so all they can say, well, Harry, there is that risk. I'll agree with you. But I don't think it's going to play out that way. That's all they can say because they've got nothing else. I, at least, may not have any prospective studies. Retrospective is all I've got, which is basically looking back and looking at the effects and all that. And the problem with retrospective studies or case studies or stuff like that is the level of control and other potential confounders. But I don't claim that it's going to basically kill you. All I say is there are risks there. When we look retrospectively in this technology, there are a whole lot of risks. And am I prepared to take those risks? No. Simple as that. Where only good prospective studies would tell us. And this is what we usually do with vaccines, 5 to 7 years, prospective studies. That means we look forward for 5 to 7 years. We do the trials. We validate. We identify risk groups, potential, or, and then we can basically modify the recommendations, whether a vaccine is used, withdrawn, or basically used in a limited way for a specific group. That's how proper policy has been conducted up until now. The problem is we've got a whole lot of politicians that have jumped on the bandwagon, social media and everyone else, and we're not allowing these organizations to anymore run. They've just been, and they're too freaking scared because a lot of these guys are just geeks. They love the science and all that, but they just don't have a backbone to fight politicians and all that. So they just tick off on them because, that gets their funding. It's unfortunate, but that's the reality. And some of the ones that have a bit of a backbone have resigned over some of this sort of stuff. And that doesn't help us because it means in future there's going to be less people to voice their concerns in those, and most people are going to be academics that just basically tick off to make sure they get their funding. That's a concern of mine, very much. Hopefully there's going to be some good people that go back into those areas, those professions and those organizations to try and actually provide them with some balance and protection for the community against, the predatory, profit-driven big pharma and the politicians that don't give a shit as long as basically they can win the next election and say, oh, we saved you. That's the reality. That's what we have to put up with. And we need to maintain credibility, because if we don't maintain credibility, I can blow all these silly arguments away like that. So can many other people. Maintaining credibility to win hearts and minds is important. If we don't, we will lose the argument. We'll be thrown to the side with all the other crackpots, and we'll basically not be able to make any inroads. And people are just going to get worse and sicker and all that. We're not helping. Sometimes it's best to say nothing rather than say things that basically are baseless or useless. Yeah, there could be some issue with something, but if you don't have something to evidence it, you're basically just talking, you're speculating. At least if you're speculating, say it. I do. I'm quite clear with you guys about certain things, and I go, I'm speculating about this, and I need to look into it a bit further. I don't make claims unless I can back them up. That's the fundamental difference. It's the line between pseudoscience and science is very thin. It's really easy to slip over it. In the past, I've done that. I've slipped over it. Probably exaggerated certain points and things, or I've seen things that weren't really there. And since then, I've sort of rectified a lot of that sort of stuff. But the problem is some people just never do. They just sort of, I've got my cause and I'm behind it. I don't have any fucking cause. For me, science is a tool to understand reality, how things play out, how matter works. I'm only interested in how it works. I'm not interested in basically some political point scoring. I don't give a shit. As I've said, if some other thing actually did this, or this diet was better than this, or whatever, I'd shift. I'm not tied to a carnivore diet or tied to any specific thing. I've got information that backs me up, archaeological information, the N15 data, and a whole lot of other things. The way the physiology, the way the body actually works. When you look at the body, it doesn't have any requirements of carbohydrates. Certain things work in a certain way. When you look at physiology, you look at enzymes. This is what I do in many cases. I will go through and I will go, okay, we've got this substance. How many enzymes are interacting with this? And why is this involved? People say you don't need this. Well, let's take a look. Go through. How does the body work? The physiology. Does it require it or not? That's how you've got to. And when you do that analysis, you realize what is pseudoscience or what is nonsense and what has credibility, because there is a reason. It's like Bart when he talks about, genetics. It's irrelevant what your triglycerides are, whatever, and all that. They can vary all over the place due to genetics, due to lifestyle and all that. We personally don't give a shit about those things. Ratios of this and ratios of that and whatever. As long as basically your body is eating a species-appropriate diet, the genes know how to work. They've been doing it for a very long time. They will vary between people. You've got the ApoE genes. You've got all these different things that can vary. How the resonant time of chylomicrons. So if you were to measure chylomicrons in somebody with a 4.4, that'd look like, we say, oh, they're susceptible to Alzheimer's and all that. It's bullshit. It's only they are susceptible slightly because they take in fat too rapidly. So if you've got too much excess sugar in the liver, you're going to cause insulin resistance much more rapidly in that person and all the after effects. where in the 3.3 or 2.2, the resident time is much longer. But if you were to basically look at, not LDL, but look at chylomicrons being in the system or remnant, you'd say, shit, these 2.2s don't look very healthy. These chylomicrons are staying in there in the bloodstream far longer. That's a reductionist way. That's the problem with reductionism when you view it like that. When you step away from that sort of nonsense pseudoscience reductionism and understand the dynamic interplay of systems, enzymes, and genetics, it all makes sense. The only thing I'm concerned about when it comes to lipoproteins, are they oxidized? Are they damaged? In the esterification, like when you attach cholesterol to fatty acids, the esterified cholesterol, are those fatty acids in the LDL oxidized? Do they come from seed oils and are they rancid and very reactive or not? Or do they come from a pig or from a cow where they don't have any of this damage? That's what I'm concerned. Am I glycating their exterior? Am I getting enough of the type of substances like arginine from meat that is going to basically provide a better nitric oxide boost and a better, basically, and also sulfur amino acids like methionine and all the other animal-based sulfur amino acids? Are they going to basically, those those hairline structures on top of the endothelium, are they going to basically stick, or are they going to basically repel the lipoproteins? Is the lipoprotein highly glycated or not? Depends on what I'm putting inside. You know, these are the things, when you look at physiology, that's what we base on our arguments. It's not rocket science. When it comes to statistics, anybody can play around with statistics. All that researchers can do in epidemiology and shit like that, they can remove certain groups in order to change the result. They do it all the time. It's called manipulation of the data or cutting off. It's a bit like when they did the LA veteran study and they started showing statins more cancer after 7 years. And what do? They stopped it right there. So they couldn't show the effect. If they did it for 10 years, it'd show a massive effect. But they eliminated that effect. So it's a minor effect. That's basically dishonest. These are the things that we rail against constantly because that is pseudoscience. That is, doing the wrong thing, misrepresenting the data, lying, actually. And the thing is, I'm not going to go down just to satisfy some of my subs. If you're not happy, goodbye. Find another crackpot to sort of follow, because I'm not a crackpot. I'm not going to countenance any of that bullshit. I'll be quite clear about it. It's bullshit, and I've got no time for it. There's a fundamental difference between being exposed to massive amounts of aluminium, massive amounts of mercury in an industrial setting or anywhere else, compared to the absolute minuscule you would find in any vaccine, if it does have it. There are some that do, some that don't. Not all of them do. But it's bloody irrelevant. It's so little. I mean, even supplements have some of this sort of stuff, if you look at it. It's like silicon dioxide. People get all wound up. So minuscule, you get it more exposed in the environment compared to what would be in a supplement. Everybody gets, oh, bloody, it's got silicon dioxide. Fucking get a life, is all I have to say. It's so minuscule. God almighty, some of their exposures of some of our lifestyle choices are far higher, and you go, and you're worried about that. God. You know why I get frustrated? I'm concerned about legitimate things, not exaggerated things. If you want the naturopathy exaggeration, there are plenty of people out there that will give you that information, that sort of, let's say, confirmation bias, don't expect it from me. Anyway, I've had my little rant about some of the nonsense. You know, you either agree with me or don't agree with me. I don't give a shit. At the end of the day, I can evidence everything. If you've got an argument with me, back it up with evidence, or have a nice day. See yous.